You're in a conversation and someone says, "Is it ever okay for Christians to disobey the law?" What would you say? People should obey the law. Social order is good and our laws preserve the social order. If people only obeyed the laws they like, the result would be chaos. But what about when laws are bad? Should Christians obey bad laws too? The next time someone says that Christians should always obey the law in all cases, remember these 4 things. Number 1, all authority is from God. The Christian understanding of government begins with recognizing where it came from. The Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 13 that there is no authority except from God. Every God-ordained social institution, including the government, the church, and the family, were created by God to serve different roles. Each has a unique purpose. One of the ways Christians show submission to God is by submitting to the authorities that God has created, which leads to the second point. Christians should obey the law. Though it's a practical necessity for all people to obey the law, for Christians, it's also a part of discipleship. The Apostle Peter instructs us in 1 Peter 2 to be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. These instructions to obey the law were written to Christians living in the Roman Empire under Nero, one of the most wicked rulers the world's ever seen. So, the duty to obey the law applies even when bad people are in authority. Does that mean Christians have to obey any law, even if it's bad? That leads us to our third point. Challenging a law is one way of submitting to it. Christians throughout history have refused to accept the status quo and worked within the law to change the law. The Apostle Paul defended his personal legal rights as a Roman citizen. William Wilberforce worked to change the law and eliminate the injustice of slavery. Using the law to challenge the law is not only acceptable for Christians, it may be an obligation. Is there ever a time when Christians must disobey the law? That leads us to our fourth point. Sometimes Christians must disobey man's law in order to obey God. The same Apostle Peter who told the church to be subject to every human institution was told by the political leaders of his day to stop telling people about Jesus. He didn't comply. As the book of Acts records, Peter proclaimed we must obey God rather than men, and he continued to do the things that men told him not to do because God had said to do them. And he is far from the only biblical example of someone who broke man's law in service of a higher law. When Pharaoh commanded the Egyptian midwives to put newborn Hebrew baby boys to death, they refused, and God approved their disobedience. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to worship a golden statue, and God rewarded their obedience by rescuing them from a furnace. Queen Esther became a hero when she disobeyed the law by going to see King Xerxes without being invited in an effort to save the Jews from genocide. The prophet Daniel likewise disobeyed a law that prohibited him from praying to God. And there's examples in church history as well. In the 4th century, St. Augustine explained that in some cases, Christians must disobey the law because an unjust law is no law at all. This sentiment was repeated in the 13th century by Thomas Aquinas and in the 20th century by Martin Luther King Jr. as he led civil disobedience in the name of civil rights. While a speed limit of 55 miles per hour rather than 75 miles per hour might be frustrating, there is no conflict with God's law. However, a law prohibiting worship or requiring abortions conflicts with God's law, and therefore Christians would have a duty to disobey. Jesus said to give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. We should do this gladly, but under no circumstances should we give to Caesar that which is God's. So next time someone tells you that Christians have to obey the law regardless of what the law says, remember these 4 things. Number 1, God created government. Christians show submission to God by submitting to the authorities God created. Number 2, Christians should obey the law. God calls Christians to be obedient, faithful citizens, even in cases of bad leadership. Number 3, working within the law to challenge bad laws is not only acceptable for Christians, it may be an obligation. Number 4, Christians cannot obey man's law if it conflicts with God's law. Both scripture and church history are filled with evidence that the duty to obey man's law ends when it calls for disobedience to God's law. For What Would You Say? I'm Brooke McIntyre. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see our next video when it's released, hit subscribe and then make sure you hit the bell so you can be notified every time a video is released. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, good, bad, or indifferent, in the comment section below. And as always, your tax-deductible contributions allow us to offer this content for free, so thanks for your support.